In the turbulent era of the 19th century American frontier, few warriors invoked as much fear as the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers. These warmongering people were so fiercely committed to battle that even their own tribe could not restrain them. Vowing to fight to the death rather than retreat, the Dog Soldiers would use their dog rope and stake themselves to the ground for a last stand. Their brutal raids and relentless warfare tactics struck terror into the hearts of settlers, against whom they harbored a militant hatred. Imagine a sleepy frontier settlement in 1865, just before dawn in Colorado. The air is still, and the only sound is the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Suddenly, a blood-curdling war cry shatters the silence. The Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, their faces covered in terrifying war paint, burst from the tree line on horseback, launching a raiding ambush. They descend upon the settlement like a swarm, their arrows finding their marks with deadly precision, their guns piercing through structures. The settlers, caught off guard, scramble for cover. But it's too late. The Dog Soldiers are upon them, wielding war clubs and tomahawks with brutal efficiency as they circle the town. Buildings burn, victims are scalped, and a total massacre unfolds. But what drove these warriors to such extreme acts of violence? What compelled them to embrace a code of warfare demanding total commitment, even in the face of certain death? This was no ordinary raid. It was a retaliation for the Sand Creek Massacre, where nearly 100 Cheyenne and Arapaho women and children were murdered. This cycle of violence upon the Great Plains of the frontier would lead to the story of Jane Bacon, who, many years later in 1968, was brutally attacked, clubbed senseless, and violated, as part of the Cheyenne raids led by leaders named Man Who Breaks the Marrow Bones and Red Nose. She was left for dead on the prairie. Jane's nightmare only intensified when the warriors returned, capturing her and taking her to their camp. Her experience mirrors that of Sarah White. My captors were ruthless. They showed no mercy, and the terror they inflicted was beyond anything I had ever experienced. I saw many terrible things during my captivity. These raids left around 40 settlers dead, numerous women assaulted, and several women and children taken captive. The violence provoked a fierce response from the U.S. Army, who vowed to forcefully remove all Cheyennes and Arapahos from Kansas, leading to a story filled with harrowing tragedies and highlighting the profound impact these events had on the American frontier. Join us as we explore what made the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers so terrifying, to discover where they came from and what shaped their fearsome appearance, brutal tactics, and unwavering commitment to battle. Welcome to the Chronicles of the Raven. There are many such stories like Jane Bacon's to be told, but understanding the terror of your enemies means understanding where they came from and how they became your enemies in the first place. Imagine the vast, untamed expanse of the Great Plains, a sea of grass stretching to the horizon. This was the domain of the Cheyenne, a powerful Native American tribe that rose to dominance in the heart of the American frontier. The Cheyenne story is one of adaptation, resilience, and ultimately, the fierce defense of their way of life. Their origins began in the north, the Great Lakes of Minnesota. Their migration due to conflict transformed them from farmers to hunters, which in turn led them to the heartland of America, the Great Plains. At its peak, this would reach from Montana to northern Texas, with a powerful presence in Kansas and Colorado. What would make these peaceful people become so terrifying? How would their warriors become known for violence? It was here in the wide open spaces of the frontier that the Cheyenne would transform into one of the most formidable Native American tribes. Central to the Cheyenne's rise to power was their mastery of the horse, which was achieved via a particularly profitable trade, dealing in stolen Mexican and Spanish stallions. Picture a Cheyenne warrior, painted for battle, astride a magnificent steed, their mounts turning them into expert horsemen and fearsome cavalry. The speed and agility of the horse allowed the Cheyenne to cover vast distances, hunt more efficiently, and engage in daring raids against other tribes and American settlers. A very similar parallel occurred with the Comanche on the southern plains. The Cheyenne used their newfound horseback prowess to exert their influence across the Great Plains. They forged alliances with other tribes, such as the Arapaho, and fiercely defended their bison hunting grounds from encroachment. However, the Cheyenne were also known for their raids upon rival tribes, such as their longtime enemy, the Pawnee and Kiowa. These lightning-fast attacks often carried out under the cover of night, served to assert Cheyenne dominance and secure valuable resources. However, as American settlers began to push westward into Cheyenne territory, tensions mounted for all peoples. The Cheyenne, proud and unyielding, refused to cede their lands without a fight. Raids upon wagon trains and isolated homesteads became increasingly common as the Cheyenne sought to drive back the tide of American expansion. The clashes between Cheyenne warriors and U.S. military forces would become increasingly ferocious, violent, and beyond moral comprehension. The Cheyenne had to evolve to survive. From this, a new breed of warrior was emerging within their ranks. The Dog Soldiers, an elite military society, began to rise to prominence in the 1830s. They were one of 6 military societies of the Cheyenne, and its most powerful, distinctive, and aggressive. These fearless fighters, bound by sacred oaths and a commitment to defending Cheyenne lands at all costs, would become the most feared and respected warriors on the plains. The origins of the Dog Soldiers are steeped in Cheyenne mythology, with tales of supernatural transformations from dogs to fierce soldiers. These stories imbued the Dog Soldiers with a sense of purpose and a belief in their own invincibility. As the Cheyenne faced increasing pressure from American encroachment, the Dog Soldiers would become the vanguard of resistance, leading daring raids and ferocious battles against overwhelming odds. What set the Dog Soldiers apart from other Cheyenne warriors? What were the secrets behind their legendary prowess in battle? Through their brutal raids that resulted in the countless deaths of innocents, could they save their tribe from extinction? An anonymous U.S. Army officer was once quoted, "The Cheyenne are formidable opponents. The Dog Soldiers fight with a ferocity and determination that are unparalleled. Their brutal tactics, though horrifying, are a testament to their commitment to defend their people." The Dog Soldiers' prowess on the battlefield was rooted in their mastery of guerrilla warfare tactics, honed through generations of conflict on the Great Plains. These elite warriors were renowned for their ability to strike swiftly and disappear into the vast wilderness, leaving their enemies reeling in the wake of their attacks. The Dog Soldiers' intimate knowledge of the terrain was a key factor in their success, allowing them to outmaneuver and ambush their adversaries with deadly precision. Imagine a moonless night on the frontier, the silence broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. Suddenly, the thundering hoofbeats of horses shatter the stillness as a band of Dog Soldiers descends upon an unsuspecting settlement. Armed with an arsenal of bows, arrows, lances, and firearms, these warriors unleash a furious onslaught, their war cries piercing the night air. The settlers, caught off guard and outnumbered, stand little chance against the Dog Soldiers' lightning-fast raids. The Dog Soldiers' choice of weapons was simple, yet effective, reflecting their deep understanding of the harsh realities of frontier warfare. While other tribes might have favored more elaborate weaponry, the Dog Soldiers relied on the tried-and-true tools of the Plains warriors, but were not afraid to use every variation and add in pistols and guns to their arsenal. Their bows, crafted from ash, hickory, or the resilient wood of the Osage orange tree, could launch arrows with deadly accuracy at distances exceeding 200 yards. The arrows themselves were often tipped with razor-sharp flint or bone, designed to inflict maximum damage upon impact. Their weapon appearance was summarized by an Ohio reporter in 1867 Kansas. These warriors were armed to the teeth with revolvers and bows, proud, haughty, defiant, as should become those who are to grant favors, not beg them. But it was not just their weapons that set the Dog Soldiers apart from other Native American warriors. Their distinctive appearance on the battlefield was equally striking and terrifying. The Dog Soldiers adorned themselves with elaborate war paint, transforming their faces into beautiful yet harrowing masks designed to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Black stripes slashed across their cheeks, while crimson handprints on their chests served as a tormenting reminder of their prowess in hand-to-hand combat. The Dog Soldiers' armor was no less impressive, crafted from the thick hides of buffalo and adorned with sacred symbols and talismans. Picture a group of fierce warriors looking upon their next raiding target. The Cheyenne Dog Soldiers stood out with their striking appearance, eagle-wing bone whistles hanging from thongs around their necks, large feather bonnets adorned with the feathers of birds of prey, and belts made from skunk skins. Armed with both bows and guns, they were a formidable force. Their songs, accompanied by snake-shaped rattles, echoed through the plains, signaling their presence. The elite among them wore dog ropes, sashes made from buffalo skin and decorated with feathers, beads, and porcupine quills draped over their right shoulder and under the left arm. This let you know who was the most potent warrior. The bravest of these fighters took it a step further and fringed their leggings with human hair, trophies from their scalped fallen enemies. These dog soldiers were not just fighters. They were symbols of unwavering courage and commitment, ready to defend their people at any cost. These elite fighters were bound by sacred oaths to never retreat from battle, even in the face of certain death. To symbolize this commitment, they would often stake their lances into the ground, tethering themselves to the spot with leather sashes. This act of defiance and bravery was a powerful statement to their enemies, a declaration that the dog soldiers would fight to the last man rather than yield an inch of ground. As American settlers and military forces clashed with the Cheyenne on the frontier, they quickly learned to fear the dog soldiers' tactics and tenacity. The Battle of Beecher Island in 1868 is a pinnacle of their violent raids and desire to fight until the end. While we will explore this in the next chapter, the question has to be asked: would the dog soldiers take their tactics too far? Was there a point where their treatment of settlers would only ensure a violent response from the US government? The true terror of the dog soldiers extended beyond their warfare tactics and battlefield appearance. The stories of their brutal treatment of captives, particularly women, spread like wildfire across the frontier, striking fear into the hearts of settlers and soldiers alike. The story of the pregnant Susanna Alderdice, who would lose all her children and her own life, might not leave you unchanged. The dog soldiers were not mindless savages, but as decades passed, they were the section of the Cheyenne tribe that refused to sign peace treaties with the settlers as their chiefs had desired, as this difference of opinion in terms of dealing with the settlers would change the frontier. The accounts of the dog soldiers' brutality are as numerous as they are horrifying. During the Civil War in 1864, they launched calculated attacks on settlements, particularly violent towards women, leaving a trail of indecency, murder, and scalping in their wake. One particularly chilling incident, known as the massacre along the Medicine Road, saw the dog soldiers attack stations and settlements from Kansas to Denver, inflicting unspeakable horrors upon those they encountered. One such occurred in 1869, as Susanna Allardyce was captured by Cheyenne warriors while living near Lincoln, Kansas. At the time, she was 3 months pregnant and a mother of 4. During her captivity, all her children were killed except for her 4-year-old son, Willis, who was critically wounded with 5 arrows lodged in his back. Susanna herself was brutally attacked and ultimately killed during the Summit Springs battle. Her story, deeply moving and tragic, underscores the devastating impact of the Indian Wars on frontier families. Many years before, there was Amanda Mary Fletcher. In 1865, while traveling with her family near Rock Creek, Wyoming, her wagon train was ambushed by a large group of Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors. Her mother was killed, and Amanda, along with her 2-year-old sister Elizabeth, was taken captive. Amanda was mutilated, mistreated, and subject to all manner of degradation, and was held for 7 months by the Cheyenne. Despite efforts to rescue her sister, Elizabeth was never returned and lived the rest of her life with the Arapaho, dying on the Wind River Reservation in 1928. Another story of those young children who assimilated into tribal life and had no desire to return to her settler families. Yet even as the dog soldiers' reputation for brutality grew, they did not consider restraint. They simply continued to engage in fierce battles and raids, even some dog soldiers wondering if they were going too far in antagonizing a country already imbued in civil war. With each raid, the dog soldiers left a foul taste in the mouths of settler enforcers and protectors. What the Cheyenne soldiers felt was protecting their lands, the Americans felt was a gross violation of peace treaties to coexist. But from the Native American warriors' perspective, this could not happen without the settlers leaving. Several more crucial events would occur that would lead to the Battle of Summit Springs and the inevitable conclusion to the dog soldiers' violence. For this, we must move back in time as to why the cycle of violence even began. The Sand Creek Massacre, a horrific event that occurred on November 29, 1864, stands as a defining moment in the history of the Dog Soldiers' violent actions. In this brutal attack, U.S. volunteer cavalry slaughtered at least 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho people, primarily women, children, and the elderly, who were peacefully encamped along Sand Creek in Colorado Territory. The massacre involved the scalping and mutilation of many bodies, with Captain Silas Soule, who refused to participate, describing it as an unjust and brutal massacre perpetrated on a peaceful camp. The aftermath of this atrocity saw the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers becoming increasingly militant, believing that peaceful negotiations were futile, and they had their evidence that the settlers would place peace and victim until they wanted more land, more resources. Their chiefs did not agree. The brutality of Sand Creek served as a catalyst, uniting previously divided warrior tribes such as the Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho in their resistance against white encroachment. The Dog Soldiers' raids and attacks intensified in the wake of this massacre, fueling decades of war on the Great Plains. The burning of the town of Julesburg in January 1865 was just one example of the retaliation that followed. As the Dog Soldiers continued their relentless resistance against the encroaching tide of American expansion, a rift began to grow within the Cheyenne Nation. Not all Cheyenne tribes shared the Dog Soldiers' unwavering commitment to war, and disagreements about the path forward began to emerge. Some favored a more conciliatory approach, seeking peace and accommodation with the U.S. government, while others, like the Dog Soldiers, remained steadfast in their refusal to sign treaties or relinquish their land and way of life. The stage was set for a bitter internal conflict that would test the resolve of the Cheyenne people and ultimately shape the fate of the Dog Soldiers. As the winds of change swept across the Great Plains, these militant warriors, who had emerged as a distinct tribe separate from other Cheyenne, created their own following after a devastating cholera epidemic that saw many members of the Massacre tribe join their ranks. They occupied a unique position between the northern and southern Cheyenne. Operating independently, they became known for their vehement opposition to the peace policies advocated by chiefs like Black Kettle. For the Dog Soldiers, the very idea of confinement to reservations was anathema to their traditional way of life. They saw these agreements as a betrayal of their ancestral lands and a surrender to the encroaching white settlers. As Bull Bear, a notable Cheyenne leader, highlighted, the Dog Soldiers deeply mistrusted the promises of peace, believing that they would only lead to further loss and betrayal. The Sand Creek massacre is always in Bull Bear's mind. This hardline stance put them at odds with the more appeasing approaches of the Cheyenne Council of 44, who sought to negotiate and forge treaties with the U.S. government. Key figures like Tall Bull and Roman Nose, crucial in leading the Dog Soldier resistance, clashed with other Cheyenne leaders who advocated for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The Treaty of Fort Wise in 1861, establishing a reservation for their people, became a flashpoint in this internal struggle. The Dog Soldiers outright refused to sign the agreement, seeing it as a direct threat to their independence and way of life. As the conflict escalated, and the brutality of events like Sand Creek became known, many Cheyenne who had initially been more open to peace found themselves drawn to the Dog Soldiers' cause. Their numbers swelled and their influence grew, further deepening the rifts within the Cheyenne Nation. The stage was set for a series of dramatic confrontations that would test the Dog Soldiers' resolve and forever alter the course of the American frontier. As the dust settled on their internal conflicts, the Dog Soldiers turned their attention to the settlers and military forces that threatened their very existence. It was time to make the frontier absolutely fear them. They were to become terrifying. The Battle of Beecher Island, also known as the Battle of Arikari Fork, was a fierce conflict between the United States Army and several Plains Indian tribes on September 17, 1868, near present-day Ray, Colorado. Commanded by Colonel George A. Forsyth, a group of 51 scouts and frontiersmen defended themselves on a sandbar in the Arikari River for 9 harrowing days. They were against a significantly larger force of northern Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Oglala Sioux warriors. The battle ensued after these tribes had been attacking, maiming, and murdering settlers and travelers in the region for months, prompting Forsyth to pursue them with a motivated group of men, many of whom had personal losses to avenge. The Dog Soldiers were killing without concern, women and children did not matter. Due to the Cheyennes' supreme guerrilla warfare ability, the Scouts never quite reached the raids in time, only just to find devastation. The Scouts finally managed to find the Dog Soldiers battalion. However, they were heavily outnumbered and entrenched on the sandbar. The soldiers repelled multiple Cheyenne attacks, including a major assault led by the formidable Dog Soldier leader Roman Nose, who was killed in the engagement. Despite severe casualties and dire conditions, including limited food and water, Forsyth's men held out until a relief force arrived on September 25th, ending the siege. The events leading up to the Battle of Summit Springs were marked by a series of even more violent raids and massacres perpetrated by the Dog Soldiers. Once again, many wondered within their own ranks if they were going too far. The raid on the Little Blue River, the Plum Creek Massacre, the raid on the Kansas settlements, and the raid on the Solomon River all contributed to the escalating tensions between the Cheyenne warriors and the U.S. military. These incidents, along with the Battle of Washita River, further solidified the Dog Soldiers' reputation as a formidable and fearsome force on the American frontier. But the tide of history was impossible to stop, and the American military had become motivated to end the Dog Soldiers' terror. Their way of life was under siege from all sides. The Battle of Summit Springs, fought on July 11, 1869, would prove to be a turning point in their struggle. Colonel Eugene A. Carr, leading a force of 244 men from the 5th U.S. Cavalry and 50 Pawnee Scouts, launched a surprise attack on a Cheyenne village led by the Dog Soldier Chief Tall Bull. The Pawnee Scouts had helped the U.S. Army track the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers for a month to make this ambush work. Striking from three sides at once, Carr's forces overran the unsuspecting encampment, dealing a crushing blow to the Dog Soldiers. Tall Bull fell in the fray, and the U.S. forces claimed a decisive victory, with 52 Cheyenne warriors killed and 17 women and children taken captive. The Dog Soldiers had now lost Roman Nose and Tall Bull. Leadership, when destroyed, often signals the beginning of the end. Weakened and demoralized, they would face an ever-tightening noose of U.S. military campaigns in the years to come. But even as their numbers dwindled and their hopes faded, the Dog Soldiers would continue to fight on to the death, as always. The decline of the Dog Soldiers was a slow and painful one, marked by a series of devastating defeats at the hands of the U.S. military. The Battle of Beecher Island in 1868 and the Battle of Summit Springs in 1869 dealt crushing blows to their military might, decimating their ranks and weakening their hold on the southern plains. As the U.S. military tightened its grip on the region, many surviving and captured Dog Soldiers were forced onto reservations with other Cheyenne, where they faced harsh conditions and inadequate supplies. The once proud warriors found themselves confined to small patches of land, their traditional way of life all but impossible to maintain. Some continued to resist, mounting occasional raids and skirmishes, but the days of the Dog Soldiers as a major military force were over. The death of their leaders and the numbers they had lost in the Battle of Summit Springs forced the huge band to disperse into smaller factions, losing the power they had used to raid the frontier throughout the 1860s. By the late 19th century, their numbers dwindled in the same way as so many tribes, like the Comanche. Disease, starvation, the extinction of bison, and the relentless pressure of American expansion took their toll. They did not have the unity, the numbers, nor the technology. Many of the survivors assimilated into reservation life, their distinctive identity subsumed into the larger Cheyenne nation. Others drifted away, seeking new lives in the rapidly changing world of the American West. Yet to dismiss their actions as mere savagery would be to ignore the complex web of historical forces that shaped their struggle. The Dog Soldiers were not born into violence. They were forged in the crucible of a world turned upside down. As the U.S. government and settler society pressed ever harder upon the Cheyenne people, demanding land, resources, and submission, the Dog Soldiers saw no choice but to fight back with all the ferocity they could muster. In many ways, the violence and cruelty of the Dog Soldiers was an act of desperation, a last-ditch effort to preserve a way of life that was slipping away with each passing day. Incidents like the Sand Creek Massacre only served to deepen their resolve and harden their tactics. For the Dog Soldiers, violence became a means of asserting their autonomy, their dignity, and their very right to exist in a world that seemed bent on their destruction. The settler victims on the frontier did not deserve their fate, Neither did the innocent Cheyenne people who wanted peace and were massacred. History once again proving violence's place, with a message to learn. Today, the legacy of the Dog Soldiers lives on in the cultural memory of the Cheyenne people. Their bravery and tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds have become a touchstone of pride and resilience, a reminder of the unbreakable spirit that has sustained the Cheyenne nation through centuries of hardship and change. As we reflect on the story of the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, it is easy to be struck by the sheer terror they inspired in the hearts of settler society. Their ferocity in battle, their mastery of guerrilla tactics, and their unflinching violence upon settlers in the face of death all combined to create an aura of almost supernatural dread. But to focus solely on their capacity for violence is to miss the deeper truth of their struggle. Nevertheless, they were one of the ultimate terrifying presences on the American frontier and show how expansionism and war have no easy place in history. The story of the Comanche offers similar truths with a unique story.